Thank you, Dr. Rajavani. This was really some feat because even before the Katowice rules are out on the UNFCCC website, we've managed to piece together from the L documents what the outcome was and really to analyze it overnight and to present a very lucid picture of the outcome. Now, unfortunately, we are running very short of time. We have only 10 minutes left. And what I'm going to do in the 10 minutes left is to take on the next two steps, which is a very brief discussion within the panel. And after that, we will throw the floor open to questions from the floor. So let me exercise my privilege as chair and pose two questions which struck me during the session. One is a very important question which, and that is, it concerns the development and diffusion of technologies, of renewable energy technologies, because essentially that is going to provide the answer to the climate change issue. Dr. Depledge touched on this when she drew our attention to Article 2C of the Paris Agreement about investment flows in renewable energy, rather generally phrased but very important clause. So my question is, what can we do inside or outside the Kyoto Protocol to stimulate investment in developing renewable technologies and ensuring easy diffusion of these technologies? And I pose this question because we are facing a serious challenge currently to the global liberal, the WTO liberal trading system. And if that gives way, then you might have, problems regarding easy diffusion of technologies. There are protective barriers created by regional groups. So what can we do to stimulate this? Do we need to work within a global agreement like the Paris Agreement? Would it be more effective to work in a smaller group consisting of countries which are the major sources of renewable energy and which are the major markets? So my first question to you, Dr. Depledge, is how do we stimulate how do we answer this very important question you raised?
Yes, I think you've put your finger on what is really the crucial question, is actually promoting and accelerating that shift in technology transfer. I think technology transfer is one area where the achievements of the regime have been quite disappointing. To be honest, there's a whole range of mechanisms in place to promote the development and transfer of technologies. I'm not sure how much they've actually achieved beyond the information exchange point of view. I think there's really a limited role for the global climate change regime as such. I don't really see the protocol or the Paris Agreement as being the real focus, of really being where the focus of our attention should lie. And here I would agree with Chandra in terms of the importance of regional and sectoral agreements. That's really where I would see that boost in technology transfer being focused. And the other side of that question concerns of financial flows, finance and investment flows, not just the technology transfer, but the investment flows. And here I was encouraged to see how the multilateral development banks have decided to align their own objectives with that of the Paris Agreement, and therefore to move away from investments in fossil fuels more towards renewable energy. And I see that as a very positive step. I see smaller international forums as being very positive. The G20, that's a particular forum where those countries could agree to really align public investment more towards green technology. I also wanted to draw attention to the Climate Change Summit, which will take place within the UN General Assembly in September next year. That's also a very suitable forum for countries to make pledges for their own public financing, also for businesses and public banks, sovereign banks, these kinds of entities. These forums, like the UN General Assembly, can provide a great opportunity to make pledges to align finance and investments with the Paris Agreement's goals.
Thank you. Dr. Chandrabhushan gave us a very lucid and comprehensive presentation. And I looked very hard for questions which I might put to you, but I couldn't find any. So may I skip to Dr. Rajamani?
I would like to answer a little bit on technology.
Okay. Maybe when we throw it open to the floor, because I suspect we are going to have questions on technology there, and it would be a good exchange. Dr. Rajamani, your presentation was absolutely lucid, as always. There was just one point which wasn't entirely clear to me, and perhaps you could clear up my confusion. You talked about, the transition from the Kyoto Protocol to the Paris Agreement, with the, reflecting the fact that the Paris Agreement has nearly universal coverage of emissions. But isn't that true of the Framework Convention and the Kyoto Protocol as well? Because through the CDM, the Kyoto Protocol enables us to address emission reductions in developing countries. And of course, in the Framework Convention, Article 4.3 has precisely that objective. In other words, in the Framework Convention and the Kyoto Protocol, you do have universal coverage. You can address things originating anywhere in the world. The only constraint was that who pays for it. And what the Kyoto Protocol required, in line with the Framework Convention, was that the tab should be picked up by Annex I countries. So would it not be true to say that, it was more a question of who picks up the tab rather than, the geographical origin of emissions that marks the change from the Kyoto Protocol to the Paris Agreement?
So while it would be true to say that coverage of emissions as far as parties are concerned, yes, there were 192 parties to Kyoto, 196 parties to the Framework Convention. If you look at all the emissions in that sense, all parties have some obligations under these instruments. Sure, there's universal coverage in the FCCC and the Kyoto Protocol as well. But the distinction is that developing countries did not, as we all know, have legally binding targets and timetables under the emission targets and timetables under the Kyoto Protocol. So the emissions coverage in relation to targets, the emissions that were being covered by targets, was limited in the Kyoto Protocol. And you're right. Of course, emission reductions could happen in developing countries and did happen in developing countries. The China Development Mechanism that you referred to earlier, that Japan termed the CDM, a lot of emission reductions happened in China and in India. But when those countries were not sort of subject to legally binding targets, the scope for leakage was huge. So you could have projects. These are all project-based sort of emission reductions. You could have projects that reduced emissions, but you could be simultaneously cutting down a forest, and you could simultaneously be sort of building coal power plants. There was not an overall cap. So the emissions, in a sense, were not being capped in these countries. So the emissions coverage in that sense, in terms of sort of emission reduction commitments, were limited.
Right.
Yeah.
So, developing country emissions could be tackled through contractual commitments under 4.3 or the CDM, but not otherwise. That
contractual project-based, so there was scope for leakage.
Contractual project-based commitments, quite right. I think that those are the sort of issues. And now we throw the floor open to the floor. Mr. Jha.
Thank you, Ambassador Dasgupta. And I will not take more than a couple of minutes of your time. I know the time is very precious. I don't think I have something specific to add to what has been said, rather than to disagree with you. I think we all agree that whatever may have been achieved, it's much too little in relation to the to the threat, the challenge we face, the time they're running out of. And I think this will continue, I'm afraid. It has been so and it will continue because because of two problems. One was that the entire debate, entire conferences were based on on the basis of pressure, of setting targets, of requiring people to do things. And whenever pressure is applied, there's counter pressure, and that's what we've been seeing, and that's what Dr. Chandrabhushan clearly pointed out. We needed cooperation, we didn't get it. Why didn't we get cooperation? Because all the conferences said what has to be done, and they didn't talk about how it can be done. If you talk about how it can be done, then you can start talking about who can do what and who can do it better. Now, that how is actually technology. And if you notice, right from the Earth Summit till today, there's never been a word on technology in any of these conferences. Technology was left to the market, and the market was supposed to deliver via the Clean Development Mechanism. It didn't do so. It gave you basically two technologies today: solar photovoltaic power and what do you call it? Ethanol, of course, which was self-limiting, and this thing, what is the other one? Solar voltaic power and wind, of course, and wind power. Now, this has been extensively taken advantage of, but we have look at the impact. Its net impact has been to very slightly slow down rise in fossil fuels. You need much better, quite different technologies, and they do exist. Solar thermal power is now down to 5 cents and has no limitations. The last 3 projects coming up in Chile are at 5 cents a unit. And there are no limitations. There's 24-hour power.
Right.
But no one's talking about it. The same with biomass. Biomass gasification has now reached a stage where you can produce anything, any transport fuel or any petrochemical out of wastes, municipal solid waste, crop residues. I would suggest that, that was my last sentence actually, Shekhar. Actually, I would suggest that the future we need to look at the possibilities, and particularly these. Since these are all not only technologically possible, but also economically viable, and biomass is viable, I can tell you at $60 a barrel is viable, and will remain so. We need to now talk about how we can promote these, and that requires a different set of policies to be discussed at the next summit. Long-term price stability for fossil fuels, not to disrupt investments in non-fossil fuels, is a very important one. And the other one is, once you've got an alternative in front of people, to say, look, we will not sanction any more oil wells and any more coal plants from a specific date. Let the ones that have been sanctioned finish. They'll finish in any case in 40 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Chandrabhushan, perhaps you'd like to take up that question.
I think this idea of technology transfer is flawed because today in this world, no one country holds monopoly on technology. Okay. So if you have solar PV technology, there are thousands of patents, and the patents are held by companies in China, India, US, Europe. So the idea that technology patents are held by only developed countries is not true. Okay. That maybe that was true 30 years back, but that's no more true. For example, the software that is being put in solar tracking is actually held by an Indian company. They hold the patent of that technology on how to track solar sun with solar PV and solar thermal. So I do not think that international negotiations are going to enable technology transfer. What we need is how do we direct fund towards technology. And one of the fundamental problems that we have started working in Africa is the cost of capital. With 26% rate of interest, Tanzania can never have solar technology. Okay. And therefore, I think if there is a global cooperation required, it is required more in financial sector than in technology sector. We need to reduce the cost of these technology by reducing the cost of capital. If we do that, and therefore, the international climate negotiations, though is talking about that we need to transfer funds from fossil fuel to non-fossil fuel, is not willing to discuss the architectural change that is required in global financial market. Okay. Till the rating of B minus and B plus that decides what is going to be the cost of capital is unfair, and we can have different panel to discuss it, but unless we do financial market changes, we will not be able to do it. The last point I want to make is, I find it completely unfair to say that coal is bad and gas is good. Okay, and that's a hypocrisy of Western environmentalists. Okay, they want coal to come down, but shale gas to go up in the US. US banks are funding shale gas. UK and Canada are talking about, we want to reduce coal, but they want to increase gas consumption. It's not that they are saying that we want to increase renewable energy consumption. So I think we need to call out this hypocrisy on technology. Coal is bad and gas is good. I think this is another issue that I wanted to touch upon.
Thank you. Well, I think we've run out of time. You've had 3 billion presentations, and it's, each presentation has been marked by a degree of lucidity. Well, I mean, you might have told me a little earlier. No, I think we should bring this to a conclusion. As I said, each of the presentations have been so clear that it's unnecessary for me as chairperson to try and sum up what was said. We had a very interesting intervention from the floor. It was both a question and line of approach. And I think that sort of helped wrap up this agreement. So I bring this session to a close. Thank you.
I didn't get a chance to have.